Hey ladies and gentlemen of the internet, Adrian here for Digital Dojos, and today Apple kicked off their WWDC week in which they introduced us to a lot of the new changes coming across, well, all their mainline platforms, from iOS, Mac OS, Watch OS, to even tvOS and Vision OS, all unifying both in its new, what they're calling liquid glass design. Looks a lot like Windows Vista and the whole Arrow motif, down to their new naming convention, which is going to be kind of like iOS 26, Mac OS 26, to kind of line up with the years to kind of make it more simpler. It's a little confusing. That's the version number, but they're still going to have names. For example, like Mac OS is still going to be Mac OS, in this case Tahoe, but it's going to be Mac OS 26. So maybe not that confusing. This is why they're changing everything to simplify around it, and that's how it presumably is going to be going forward. But a lot of what was announced today was about that whole unification and the whole kind of consistency across the board with this design. And it's getting a lot of mixed thoughts and reviews. It is this new, what again they're calling liquid glass, kind of transparent, embossed like design, which we're going to be taking a look at both here on Mac OS and iOS, as I've updated to the developer betas on two of my devices, boldly updating here on my iPhone and my daily driver to kind of see what that user experience and new design is like. So taking a look at it on the iOS side of things, I've been updated here for the last couple hours on the developer beta. So notably, there's going to be some bugs, but right off the top, you can notice a couple of things. This new interface, and it's a little bit harder to see because of all the lights here, so I'm going to try to lower the brightness. But depending on your wallpaper, you're going to kind of get mixed, look at how the new design works, because it's meant to kind of act as if it's this embossed layer that sits on top. But you can see in a wallpaper like mine, where it's a white background, the numbers actually clash quite a bit. Now in person, it looks a little bit better. I can see the numbers more clearly, and it's meant to kind of like shift around lighting wise as a kind of gimmick as you move the phone around. But yeah, you can customize this. So you do have customization options here to adjust like how the time looks. You can see you can really kind of stretch it out. So it's building a little bit on top of the prior iOS 18 customizations, allowing you to tweak it a little bit further, and then really playing further on this whole new design aesthetic. You can see it literally goes across from the time to the buttons and the shortcuts here, and then that will further extend into the actual home screen. So you can see the home screen, how it looks here on my iOS 26 home screen. Icons are a little bigger. They're definitely more like embossed, and it's a lot of rounded kind of curved design down to the dock. If you hold and customize on the interface here, you can see you can change from the standard default dark, now clear design, where it's this kind of transparent design. This is the new one that they're touting, which I actually might try to sport. I'm a big fan of this kind of transparent design, but I think it can be hit or miss depending on your setup sometimes and how it gets implemented. So we'll see how I kind of feel about that in the long run. You can change it from auto, light, or dark depending on your preference, which will kind of adjust how the icons react. And then you have your tinted design still, which you can also do. But I believe tinted was already an option in the prior iOS, if I'm not mistaken. So again, just a little bit extension of the prior customization options, and then that coupled with the fact you have the option and this new kind of design here. I will say it's more noticeable in the native app designs, like for example Apple Music, where you can see the bottom rounded menus and stuff is meant to align with the curvature of the actual iPhone, which to me makes sense. And you can see here, as you navigate in certain interfaces, it kind of floats away and it makes itself more minimal and compact, which I like. I like how they integrate in certain apps like this, but I will say in certain cases, you can see here, the icons sometimes become almost indistinguishable. And I can see from an accessibility standpoint, like when you have certain icons, like so, where you can kind of barely even read what that icon is in the bottom left. Like obviously it's the home icon and so on and so forth. But I can see in certain instances where this transparency or translucent liquid glass, so to speak, could become more of a readability issue for people based on what's in the actual background of the app or even their own wallpaper that they're interacting with. Now, another app that got some notable changes is the messaging app, and really it just got the ability to do some things like you can now integrate some live translation features I think are going to be coming out with Messages, Phone, and FaceTime. But you also now have the ability to edit your messages and kind of come up with a background if you want to customize it. So if I click on the Backgrounds tab here for this chat, I can kind of change the background for this messaging here, and you can kind of see what it will look like and swipe between styles. And I believe this will change it for both you and the recipient. In this case, they would have to be on the latest iOS 26, but you get the idea. Very akin to things like Instagram. And you can see here in things like Control Center, the new design really kind of sticks out with this embossed liquid glass, translucent kind of look and feel. Again, it can look a kind of crazy in some aspects where there's like a lot going on in the screen visually, and I feel like at certain times it can make text hard to read. You can see in an example like this is just my notifications center as things come in, and again, depending on what you have going on in the background, it tries to blur the bubbles and show it, but I can also see where in certain cases like certain things are just more unreadable here. Now, there are apps where I do feel like they hit the spot in terms of design and simplifying things, and the photo app is one of them. You get a more kind of simplified look at what you're usually going to be using on your photos, and that's probably photo or video. And then if you want more options, you can just kind of swipe at the bottom here to interact with them. Otherwise, they kind of just float away and hide away, which, again, to me makes sense from just a design perspective as well as a usability perspective. And then it hides some of those buttons that you're normally used to, but you have the ability to kind of swipe up and get access to them if you do want to adjust or tweak them. Otherwise, the interface kind of stays clean and simple. Now, this obviously then extends over to the Mac OS side of things with the desktop interface, where a lot of what Apple was touting on was this, again, unified design. The same design language across things like system preferences, your Finder windows, and again, bringing that same look and feel to the desktop side of things. Now, macOS also got its own slew of new features and improved Spotlight search finally, which takes a lot of notes from things like Alfred or Raycast and making your Spotlight actually useful and allowing you to kind of enable shortcuts and navigate your Mac more effectively and efficiently, and not just making it something to like type in, trying to find a file and it can't find a file on your Mac. They finally have brought Spotlight more up to speed. Now, notably, what I will say in macOS, you also get more integrations, deeper level of integrations for things like live activity from your phone to your Mac. Again, it's playing on the whole. If you're in this ecosystem, they're imagining you have multiple devices, making it easier to kind of see things across devices, and then have that same design language from iOS to macOS. In this case, Mac OS Tahoe, as they're calling it now. Now, I can't help but notate, obviously, this is going to extend to things like watchOS, which I've yet to test personally, but again, bringing that same design language over to iPadOS. And notably, the one thing I am excited to test this on my iPad Pro eventually is the iPadOS is getting the most notable changes in terms of behavior and how the OS looks and feels, and that's because they're finally treating the iPad maybe not like a computer, because that's the whole gimmick, that the iPad is, something beyond a computer, but giving you more desktop-like interface and ways to navigate it, actual window management, cursors, and things like that, and bringing a more of a, again, desktop-like experience to the tablet and this whole new design, which I know a lot of iPad enthusiasts are finally happy to see. And then, of course, all of this extends to that of where probably a lot of the inspiration stems from, the Apple Vision Pro and the Vision OS that runs it. And a lot of the design cues, and you can see a lot of the kind of ideas of which this whole liquid glass arrow Windows Vista meets Mac OS design language change probably stems from a lot of what they did on Vision OS and kind of gets ported over there as well, and some major updates. It's getting things like new widgets and stuff like that. But again, this is a device, admittedly, I've yet to also put on the developer beta. I started with my iPhone and one of my Macs here in the studio, so more testing is going to have to be done there to see how these new features port over to Vision OS. On one hand, it's nice to see Apple offering some more level of customization and customability. I remember back in the day even in the last couple of years, admittedly, iOS has just stayed iOS. Yes, it's gotten interface lifts and things of that nature. And over the years, we've seen it go from this, standard out of the box experience to eventually adopting the skeuomorphic design language, which personally I was a fan of, to then moving on into this kind of flat era. And now we're in this embossed liquid glass transparency era of design, and seemingly what seems like is going to be the future of the design language, not just for things like your mobile phone, but across the board with Mac, Apple Watches, Vision OS, and even your iPad. And again, I'm not quite sure how I feel about it. I don't want to judge the animation speeds and the overall look and feel too much just yet because I am still in the developer beta. But I think in certain aspects and implementations, things were done well. Some of the native apps, like I said, the rounded corners and designs make sense for the new design of the phone. But in other areas, I feel it's just truly lacking in terms of just design aesthetic and what's actually functional and maybe even accessible for others to use on a day-to-day basis. I can honestly see an interface like this making it much harder for somebody like my parents, for example, to navigate their phone if the wrong settings are tweaked or even the wrong wallpaper is used. So again, it'll be interesting. I think time will tell to see how it comes out of beta and see some of the changes they make on the final versions. And this is quite literally day one that we're judging it from. But it is an interesting step. It's a big step for Apple to kind of universally design and change their design language and implement these new features. They tried to talk a lot about Apple Intelligence again, which hasn't really, hit the mark as of its release. So I think there's other areas, in my opinion, that could have been focused on, but nonetheless, what do you all think? What are your thoughts and opinions? Drop it down in the comments below. And if you're looking forward to more coverage and insight into some of these new releases, both for Mac OS, iOS, Apple Watch OS, Vision OS, iPad OS, then consider subscribing for more content to come. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, thanks for watching. And look, I want to notate across these OSs, there's a lot of other features that Apple obviously hit on today under the hood that I only kind of skimmed the surface on, or I guess the liquid glass. Obviously, like I said, there's major updates to what they're claiming is Apple Intelligence and whether or not that will come to fruition. But some screening tools, like the ability to kind of hopefully mitigate and negate things like spam calls and telemarketers from distracting you, where it can kind of field the call for you before it even decides to ring you. Updates to CarPlay across the board, as well as many other app updates and features. And again, this extends to all of the other OSs, whether it's Mac OS, Watch OS, a lot of refreshments across certain features and functionality. The live translation, which is going to extend both to not just messages, but FaceTime and FaceTime and the phone app, which again is a big win. And I think an actual use case that makes sense for day-to-day life. All the way down to, like I mentioned, the major updates that are going to be coming to things like iPad OS and true window multitasking that I think a lot of iPad or iPad OS users and power users, or people who maybe even use it as a desktop replacement, will be very happy to see.